living fully alive in every way. You're listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol.
Are you an inquiring husband who wants to know? Hi there, I'm Dr. Carol, and this is Relationship Prescriptions. A couple weeks ago, I addressed several questions that wives had written in about very challenging marriage issues. Today, I'm going to address some questions that husbands have written in. Marriage, of course, is a two-way street, and neither sex has a corner on bad behavior or feeling challenged about this. Perhaps even this recent COVID-19 pandemic season has increased the stress in your marriage a lot. And perhaps some of these issues will speak especially to you in that sense. Now, I just want to start with acknowledging that in the Christian church, in some circles, men have gotten the impression that marriage problems are their fault. If that's the case, first of all, my apologies to you for that message, if you have gotten that message. However, you cannot change your wife. You can only change you. So the perspective I'm going to take in addressing these questions is acknowledging the reality of how troubling these situations are, but also remembering that you can only change you. And so I'll be helping to focus on what are those things that you can do. So please know that nothing I am saying is minimizing the bad behavior that your wife may have engaged in or be engaging in. But I do want to help you see what you can do about the situation, focusing on whatever aspects of this you can control. So here's the first question. This husband says, "My wife and I are about to decide whether we're going to stay in this mess or walk away. I grew up alone, abused, and badly broke. When we married, I showed my wife the way I thought life was, but the last 4 years, I've been looking into other ways of living. I've released all my control over my wife, but then she went and had hours of texting with a guy at school having an emotional affair. It stopped when I talked to the guy about it. Now, 3 months later, I looked at her phone and there's a 19-year-old calling her nicknames and texting about intimate things. When I asked her to set boundaries, she got all mad. We've been at odds ever since. I actually was quite terrible to her about it. After 9 years of marriage, I feel we are at the point of no return. I go to a shrink once a week, and she and I go to counseling, but she won't get a counselor for herself. And now, even when I'm being nice to her, she seems so far away. What do I do?" First of all, I want to say that you acknowledging how you have in some ways not been nice to her is a great starting point. And you asking, what can I do? That is really a very important question. And although your wife's having an emotional affairs is wrong and hurtful, you focusing on what you can do and what you can change is the only thing you have control over. You said a statement at the beginning of your question, almost dismissing it. And I want to mention that you said you grew up alone, abused, and badly broke. When we experience trauma, it changes our way of relating. It changes our expectations about marriage, about our own responses to that, and becoming easily irritable and not treating your wife well, had its roots very likely in some of the things that you experienced growing up. I am sure you did not wake up one day and decide, I am going to go out and hurt my wife today. I'm going to treat her badly. Your natural responses came out of what brought you to this point. And so the first thing I want to encourage you to do is to deal with your heart in those ways. You said you're going to a shrink, as you said. That's good. And I want to really encourage you to to look below the surface in some of those things and find healing and restoration for your own heart in the ways that you were wounded and what you brought to the marriage of your own brokenness. As you deal with those things, your heart can become restored and healed and stronger. And that is absolutely the place that needs to start. Then how do you deal with your wife? How do you deal with your relationship? I want to encourage you to win her heart again. In the ways that you have wounded her, go and express to her that you know that. Ask her to forgive you. That doesn't minimize her bad behavior, but you are acknowledging the parts of this that you contributed to. And that can oftentimes lower defenses and make a bridge between the two of you possible. It will take some time for you to demonstrate to your wife that you are becoming someone new. But that is something that you can do. As you work through your own traumas, your natural responses and the responses that you choose to have, even when difficult things come up to your wife, can become different. You can win her heart, and I want to encourage you to focus on that. Don't focus on trying to tell your wife what to do or what not to do, but focus on winning her heart again. It sounds like you did that once. You've been married for, I believe you said 9 years. So focus on winning her heart again. That kind of an invitation to connection is, at this point, the only real chance that you have. A tool that I would like to suggest you consider is our Guide to Healthy Communication in Marriage. If you go to drcarolministries.com/talk, drcarolministries.com/TALK. You can find out more about that. This is a practical guide that you can get either as a digital download or as a small paperback, and it will help you understand so much about how men and women communicate differently and some tools that can help you come closer together and bring down some of those barriers between you. If you invest that kind of time and energy in, first of all, becoming someone new, and then in winning your wife's heart, there is some real possibility that this relationship can be changed. So honor your heart in the process. And most important of all, stay on your knees. Keep asking God to show you his perspective on this whole thing and to keep changing you. And I add my prayers to that he do intervene in your marriage. When two people come together who are both broken, and frankly, friends, that's almost every marriage, God's design is that union, that marriage be a tool to bring healing to those very places that both of you have been wounded. Now, it may seem that marriage is exactly the wrong place for that to happen, but often it is the only place where we are forced to deal with our stuff. When there is so much pain in your marriage, in part because of your own brokenness, you can't ignore it any longer. And God can use that very thing to both bring you healing and then create an environment where your spouse can as well. And in that process, the two of you can come closer together. Oh, deep breath. Another question from another husband. He says, I'm battling a lot of things in my head. When I mention to my wife that I ever had an affair, she is going to overreact and things are going to go very wrong. I'm still gathering myself and planning a suitable time to mention it to her, but she's too emotional. She goes to extremes about a lot of things. She's too hyper for me to cool down. I have asked for God's forgiveness about the affair. That's a heavy burden to carry. And I want to say, first of all, that going to God for His forgiveness is absolutely the most important place to start. The next thing I want to encourage you to do is to get below the surface and ask your heart some of the important questions about why. Certainly, feeling bad about breaking the marriage vows and having an affair is important. But if that's all you do, it may be you are at risk for doing this again. And the way to deal with that is to get below the surface and ask yourself the questions about why. Where were you not tending to your heart? Where had you allowed your affections to stray? Were you hanging around people that may have just, even without saying so in so many words, just let that happen? Were there old wounds in your heart that were unhealed that an affair seemed to be an easy answer to? And there's lots of other possibilities. So getting below the surface and addressing why you got into that situation in the first place is going to be real important. That is part of the journey to becoming someone new. Simply asking God's forgiveness for an act that was wrong is important, but what is so much more important is that you are on a journey to becoming a different kind of person. That's the goal of dealing with what's under the surface about why, and then to continue on a journey where the Holy Spirit changes you from the inside out. Now, that doesn't mean we become perfect. It does mean that we become different so that the same kinds of things that would have tripped you up in the past won't trip you up in the future. Now, as far as talking to your wife about something as difficult and heart-wrenching as this, you did not say how long ago this event was, how long ago you had an affair. If this was many years ago and you are a different person now, that is very different than if this was recent. It makes a difference, for example, if this person you had an affair with is on social media and could potentially reach out to you or to your wife. It makes a difference if you are still working with this person. That's a very different scenario. If you go to church with this person who you had an affair with, if those more recent vulnerabilities are in place, I believe that makes it a lot more important that you are honest about this with your wife. I believe it's almost always the right thing to do to tell your wife about an affair. The only exceptions would be if this was a very long time ago and it would only add more burden to her. Yes, when you tell your wife, it will add a burden to her, but if she finds out from another source, that is going to be much greater. When you plan to tell your wife about this, let me encourage you to put it in a framework of, I know I hurt you. I know I was wrong. I've asked God's forgiveness, and I'm asking your forgiveness. I'm not expecting you to trust me immediately again. These are the steps that I am taking to become a different kind of husband. Yes, she may get very worked up, very emotional. That would be appropriate. You can't prevent that. And don't not tell your wife because she would get upset. This is part of the consequences of your behavior. But what you can do is express to her what you are actively doing to make a difference in the future. For example, if this was somebody that you worked with, how are you going to prevent the relationship from, quotes, flaring up again in the future? That may mean you change jobs. If this person is going to your church, how are you going to handle that in the future? Are you getting together with other guys in a regular way to have support for dealing with the underlying places in your soul that might have made this kind of an affair appealing? The point is, you are not just trying harder to not do it again and hoping against hope that your wife doesn't throw you out. You are acknowledging the depth of the pain this caused and are on a journey to becoming someone new. That's the only chance that you have. But I do want to emphasize that is possible. And what will make the difference for your wife is that over time, she can see that you are actually demonstrating that you are different. It will take some time to rebuild trust. It may take a very long time to rebuild trust. But don't discount that possibility. Give God the option of restoring your marriage. Another deep breath. Whoa. Okay. Husband number 3. He writes, "My wife has had it with me. She filed for divorce. She said she doesn't love me and I'm not making her happy in the way I treat her. She said that God told her to get divorced. I know I was bad for a period of time. I put my wife through difficulties with arguments and mistreating her. I've always loved her and told her that, but I didn't always show her. It seems like this came out of the blue, but she had a family member in whom she confided. She also hasn't seen her family as they threw her out because of our racial differences. But now that she has left the family, they want her back and she misses them. I love her and I know I'm at fault and have repented for how I've treated her, but we are on the brink of divorce. I pray for God to intervene. I ask him what I should do, but he seems silent. I don't know what to pray for. What can I do?" Wow. Let me start by suggesting some things to pray for. Probably most important is to pray for God to show you his perspective on all of this. I can imagine that you are probably praying for God to change your wife's heart and to save your marriage, and that's important. But at a more foundational level, pray to understand God's perspective. Understand how God sees you. Again, you didn't just wake up one day and decide to mistreat your wife. There are underlying issues in your own soul that led to that. This is not about heaping shame on yourself and buying into that condemnation from the enemy. That won't help. What will help is to have God's perspective on what brought you to this place. God sees you. He sees not only the trauma in your marriage and being on the brink of divorce and you feeling devastated about that. He sees what brought you to this point. And bring that to him. He wants to heal that. And then ask for God's perspective on your wife's heart. There's almost certainly pain there too. Simply thrashing about and grabbing onto trying to keep your marriage together out of desperation isn't going to be helpful. God's perspective on your heart, on your wife's heart, and on your marriage can help you see what to do, understand the steps to take. And then as you understand your wife's heart, ask God to help you see how to win her heart again. Now, in this kind of tough situation, that is going to be challenging. It's going to take some time. But I would encourage you to take that perspective. How can you invite your wife closer to you? Your bad behavior is going to have to stop. I pray that it has, that how you have mistreated her is not continuing. Now, you may not do that perfectly. So if you see yourself slipping and reacting in a prickly way, immediately stop and ask her forgiveness. But you'll need to intentionally act in different ways to win her heart again. And asking for God's perspective on her heart can help you do that. Use everything you know about her, about what's important to her. You mentioned that you have children. I didn't read that part of the note, but you have some young children. Come together about that. Enter her world. You may also find the Guide to Healthy Communication in Marriage helpful in this regard as well. You can go to, again, on our website, drcarolministries.com/TALK to find out more about that Guide to Healthy Communication in Marriage. Check that out and invest in learning some of those tools and give God an opportunity to restore your marriage. Okay, another deep breath. The last husband's note that we'll address today. He writes, "My wife has a revulsion to sex and intimacy. She's basically told me it's never going to happen again, and I'm devastated. She won't even seek help anymore. She gets extremely angry when I bring up the subject, so I just stay quiet. I've spent a lot of time on my knees, but the Lord seems silent. I don't know if it's just me or me not knowing how to hear his voice. She's not interested in praying, reading, or anything of the sort. It seems like she's given up on God, and that breaks my heart more than anything. I considered a separation, but I'm even more lonely when I'm away from my family, and divorce has never been an option in my mind. I've never felt more alone than I do right now. I've really been trying to put God first, and I find comfort in his word, but he doesn't talk back, or at least I can't hear him. I prayed that my wife would hear from him more than myself. I feel lost. Thank you for listening." Well, friend, I'm glad you're seeking God. When things are tough, that's always the first place to go. And similarly to what I described for the last husband who wrote, my encouragement is to ask God to show you his perspective on your marriage and on your heart and on your wife's heart. Couple things that may be at play here that I want to bring up as possible categories for you to think about. One is that you are praying a lot, it sounds like, and your wife seems to have moved away and not be interested in praying. I'd like you to consider, is the way you are bringing God into your relationship, is that adding to your wife's difficulty and trauma? Some people who are religious use that as a way to manipulate and control. Has that been part of the dynamic between you and your wife? If so, then her pulling back from talking about God or praying together, etc., could very well be part of the issue. Again, I'm focusing on what you can do. I'm sure there is much that your wife can and should do differently. But again, I'm focusing on your role, what you can do. And that's one area I would ask you to consider. Step back and look at the world from your wife's perspective. Would the way you talk about God be inviting, or would it be off-putting and discouraging. Remember, Jesus did not bring himself to people's world in a demanding way. Everybody who came into Jesus' presence would have felt invited. Does your wife feel invited? Does it feel safe to come closer to God when you are talking about God? And for that matter, does it feel safe to come closer to you? A dynamic around sex and intimacy that I have seen often in couples, and I don't know if this is the case with you, but often in couples, the husband will feel like sex is an entitlement, that because I'm married and because I'm the husband, that I am entitled to sex with my wife. And sex becomes you taking from your wife. If that is the case, it's very understandable how she would come to the point of saying, I can't do that. Sex is not an entitlement. I know that can be hard for some people to understand, and the 1 Corinthians 7 passage often comes up in that context. But 1 Corinthians 7 does not say you can demand sex from your wife. It doesn't mean that sex is a right that you have. It encourages both husband and wife to give themselves to each other. But the converse is not true. It does not mean that you can demand your wife's body for your own pleasure. It means you should be giving yourself to your wife in the way that brings her pleasure. But it does not mean you can demand that from her. So the way to go about this is to seek to understand the world from her perspective. Now, in that light, if your wife is saying no to sex, that does have an impact on you. And so acknowledging the reality of that in your own soul is real. It's a big impact. So I want to ask, are you intentionally seeking healthy connections for people to walk alongside you in this journey? You indicated from your note that it doesn't seem like you are. You said you've never felt more alone. You do need healthy, godly guys to come alongside you and to support you in this journey. And I would encourage you to look for guys who are not going to commiserate with your misery. That's not helpful. What you want is guys that can listen to you, but then encourage you in being the husband that God needs you to be to your wife in this season. That's not easy. That will take a lot out of you. And therefore, it's even more important that you connect with other godly guys who can support you in doing just that. And I would pray and ask God to show you who that is. Ideally, that's 2, 3, 5 guys in your church, in a small group that can just gather together, and you don't always talk just about the challenges with your wife, but just can support you in your walk with God and giving you some of the emotional and people fuel you need. Another source to get that, if it's difficult to get that in your church or community, consider joining our online community, the Fully Alive group. We talk about these challenging marriage situations there, as well as a whole lot of other things like porn and anxiety and what's happened with this COVID-19 and toxic religion and all of those kind of things in the Fully Alive group, fullyalivegroup.com. So come check that out. You need people around you. And then I believe one of the most helpful questions to pray about is to ask God, who do you need me to be to my spouse in this season? Sometimes that means suffering. Jesus did not promise an easy life. Sometimes that means taking hands off and giving God his opportunity to do his work. Sometimes that means stepping up and having difficult conversations. Sometimes it means engaging with your spouse in ways that are difficult to hear. It may be, for example, that your wife's revulsion to sex and intimacy has to do with things in her past that have deeply wounded her. It will be important that you engage with her in that, not in a way to fix her. Please don't try to fix her, but in a way to listen and be a safe place for her to be real, if that's the case, or whatever it is. God may need you to intentionally learn to seek your wife's heart rather than going after her body. What does your wife need? Who does God need you to be to your wife in this season? And I believe that can be an exceptionally helpful way to pray. Well, I hope that these questions from struggling husbands have perhaps given you some insight into what may be challenging in your marriage. Both husbands and wives can face trouble. Marriage is a laboratory in this earth for us to learn to love well. And it sometimes is the toughest laboratory. I think for many of us, God knows that we would not likely go through the pain and challenges and struggling with all of this if it were easy, if we weren't forced to. And being in a challenging marriage can be that. It can be a way to give God the opportunity to do the really hard things in your life. The resources, again, that I mentioned, our Guide to Healthy Communication in Marriage, drcarolministries.com/talk, TALK, or we'll have the link to that in the show notes. And then our online community, fullyalivegroup.com. I also love dealing with husbands and wives or individuals or couples who are going through tough times and bringing insight in a coaching relationship. I can bring God's insight to some of these situations and help you see some next steps to take. So if that's the case, just send me a message on our website, use the Contact Us page, and I'll be delighted to help you in that way as well. Thank you for being part of our podcast family, and until next time, may God bless you.
Thank you for listening to Relationship Prescriptions with Dr. Carol. Our purpose is to provide trustworthy resources that help you and others live fully alive in every way as God intended. If you would like to help others experience transformation in their lives and relationships, we invite you to partner with us. Text the word GIVE, that's GIVE, to the number 512-980-1620, or visit our website at drcarolministries.com/donate to make a one-time contribution or monthly gift. Your financial support allows us to expand our message and to help others. Thank you so much, and may God bless you.